The Harland Case, Part 1. Arrival Before the Storm. The road climbed into white. Pines leaned under the weight of new snow, their branches creaking like old ships in a slow sea. Detective Rowan Hale eased the rental up the final switchback and saw Harland Lodge at last. Stone shoulders, copper roof, and a line of warm windows that looked like watchful eyes. A weather vane shaped like a running fox whirled north, then east, then north again, undecided. A man in a wool cap waved him toward the portico. "Detective Hale, I'm Anders, groundskeeper." Close up, Anders had the blunt hands of someone who fixed things that didn't want to be fixed, and a thin white scar under his left eye. He took Rowan's bag like a reflex. People always assumed the detective was here to fix something too. "Storm moves in at 9, Anders said. "Once it's on us, no one's going anywhere. Mr. Harland planned it that way." He said it without judgment, but the words hung between them like frost. They crossed into heat and the smell of pine polish. The foyer stretched beneath a chandelier of blown glass antlers. On the wall, a display of antique knives arranged in a sunburst. One slot was empty. Rowan noticed that in the practiced way a pianist notices a missing key. "Welcome." A woman descended the staircase with a martini like a prop. Clara Harland's dress was black, the kind that pretends to be simple and is not. Her eyes did not pretend anything. "Rowan Hale, Victor speaks of you as if you were a character in a favorite book." She extended a hand. Her fingers were cold, ring heavy enough to anchor a boat. "Let's hope the book isn't a tragedy," Rowan said. "That depends who's telling it." They moved through rooms the way a current moves under ice. Art everywhere, a gouache of a burning carnival, a small bronze of a hand that seemed to be letting go of something that was not there, a landscape in winter where the only color was a red scarf abandoned in snow. The radiator in the hall clicked twice and fell silent. Rowan glanced at the antique regulator clock above it. Its pendulum swung like a heartbeat, but noted the time. 6:17. He would look again later. Victor Harland appeared in the salon doorway as if stepping out of a portrait. He was smaller than his reputation, which is to say he fit in a human room. White hair combed straight back, a face both avid and tired. He wore a velvet jacket and a smile not quite as warm as the jacket. "Rowan, my Cassandra and my insurance policy." He shook both Rowan's hands like the detective might vanish if he let go. "You'll enjoy tonight. I've gathered only my dearest enemies." "Honored," Rowan said. "Don't look so grim. I'm unveiling a masterpiece." Victor's grin tightened. "And a new will." A log cracked sharply in the hearth. The wind pressed the palm against the window and then, finding it barred, moved on. The others arrived on their own tides. Miles Harland, Victor's son, carried a sports bag he didn't put down. He had the elastic smile of a man who rehearsed charm in elevators. His knuckles were scuffed, the tan line where a watch had been ended abruptly. He shook Rowan's hand too hard. "Detective," he said. "Big fan of true crime?" "Only when it's fiction," Rowan said. Lydia Voss, the art critic, young enough to be underestimated and already bored of that fact, wore a tartan coat and a small, satisfied bruise on her wrist, half hidden by a bracelet. She clocked every object in a room and every face looking at those objects. Graham Tate, the lawyer, smelled faintly of a cigar he wasn't currently smoking. His tie was an apology for something his eyes were not sorry about. He spoke to Clara as if they shared a problem he was not responsible for. Dr. Evelyn Cross arrived last, umbrella bristling with sleet like a porcupine. A psychiatrist by training, a collector of awkward pauses by hobby. She took in Rowan the way a surgeon takes in an x-ray, nodded to herself, and smiled with only the upper half of her face. Anders closed the great front door. The wind's whistle became a hum. Somewhere in the service corridor, a generator coughed, caught, settled. Dinner was at 8. Before that, Victor insisted on a tour of the gallery, a room with museum humidity and security glass that reflected faces back as faint ghosts. The masterpiece sat under a linen shroud. Victor hovered near it the way a child hovers near a birthday cake before the song. "Patience," he said to Lydia. who had drifted toward it like a moth. We unveiled together. Rowan walked the perimeter. Motion sensors blinked a soft green. Each painting had a discreet brass plate. The security panel by the door had been opened recently. A small smear of green paint, verditeur maybe, marked the edge, the way a fingerprint marks a decision. The panel screws were not perfectly aligned. One sat askew as if tightened by a new hand. In the far corner, a camera watched the room with red patience. A second camera's eye was dark. Rowan set that in the mental tray where he kept things that might matter. At 7:52, the wind found a seam and rattled a shutter hard enough to make Clara flinch. "Anders," she called. "The south shutters." "Latched," came the answer. "They just like to talk." Dinner glowed, candles, silver bright as ice. A bottle of burgundy, with dust the color of old books. Victor presided at the head, Clara at the foot. The symmetry felt intentional. The empty knife slot from the foyer sunburst felt intentional too, even 3 rooms away. They ate onion soup that steamed like secrets and lamb pink as a blush someone hoped you wouldn't notice. Conversation traveled in circles that pretended not to be interrogations. Lydia asked Evelyn about the ethics of treating someone who collects people. Evelyn smiled and asked Lydia how often criticism is a mirror dressed as a knife. Miles laughed a little too loudly at something Graham didn't say. Rowan watched salt fall from Victor's fingers. He watched Clara's ring tap her glass, once, twice, a third time when she thought no one heard. He watched Anders hover just long enough to be remembered and then vanish through the swing door that led to the pantry. The regulator clock in the hall ticked beyond the doorframe. When Rowan glanced past the dining room arch at 8:31, the pendulum stuttered and resumed. Clocks tell the truth even when people won't. They just don't tell you which truth. Dessert was a pear tart glazed to a high shine, like a lie that had polished itself into a virtue. Victor lifted his glass. "To art," he said. "To the terrible mercies of taste. To the mercy of terrible taste, Graham." Laughter. "To my son, who will forgive me when I am dead." Less laughter. "And to my wife, who forgives me daily, Clara." Silence shaped itself to resemble a toast. The lights went out. Not the slow dim of a switch deliberating, but the single cough of a heart deciding no. Someone breathed in through their teeth. Anders swore gently in the corridor. The generator barked, failed, barked again. A candle guttered and went out with a hiss like a secret executed. Rowan stayed very still and counted. 1. The scrape of a chair leg. 2. The clink of glass, toppled. 3. Footsteps, not running, deliberate. 4. A breath near his shoulder that was not his. 5. The soft, unmistakable sound of a blade leaving a sheath. Memory is a trickster. Blades make 100 sounds. This one left a sheath, not a drawer. 6. The generator caught. Light surged and dimmed, settled at half-glow. Victor Harland sat at the head of the table, as he had before. He was very straight in his chair, as if bracing against a wave no one else felt. The knife in his chest was elegant, old, and had not been on the table a minute ago. Blood gathered on the linen like a flower found and pressed too late. Clara did not scream. Her glass chimed once against the plate, the same rhythm as her ring had made earlier, then tipped and rolled into silence. Miles said, "Dad," in a voice that still expected an answer he would hate. Lydia's hand went to her wrist and then away. Graham pushed back his chair, steady as a verdict. Evelyn Cross closed her eyes like a door and opened them as a window. Rowan said, in the voice people obey because it holds a place for their panic, "No one moves." The storm arrived as if called. The windows whitened with snow. The wind put its shoulder against the lodge and leaned. Somewhere deeper in the house, a single shutter, south side, banged until it found the latch and stopped. The regulator clock in the hall ticked as if timing something that had already happened. Rowan circled the table slowly. Victor's blood was bright. The knife's hilt was bone inlaid with a fox. The antique sunburst in the foyer had featured such a knife. The empty slot nagged at the back of Rowan's eye. The entry wound was clean, purposeful, not frenzied. Whoever did this had not been guessing. He glanced at the floor. No spatter where there should have been, less than the theatrics suggested. He looked at Victor's right hand, a smear of green under the nail, the same green he had seen on the security panel screw. He looked at the wine. The burgundy in Victor's glass was untouched. The water glass was not. Condensation traced a single finger's path. "Phones," Graham said, as if to a secretary he did not employ. "Call." "The lines will be down," Anders said from the doorway, hat in hand as if the room required deference from everyone. "They go first in a blow like this." "Sit, Mr. Tate," Rowan said without looking at him. "Everyone stays where I can see them." Clara placed her martini down very carefully and folded her hands, as if kneeling in a chapel she did not believe in. "Rowan," she said, "you were invited to prevent this." Rowan touched the knife's hilt with the back of a knuckle, not enough to shift it, enough to feel the temperature of the past minute. Cold. He studied Victor's collar, a faint thread caught on the button, pale as breath. He said that in the mental tray as well. "The first thing I prevent," Rowan said, "is the second body." The kitchen door swung on its spring and stilled. The smell of blown-out candle and caramelized sugar lingered. The winds moaned deep into a throatier note, as if gathering itself. He looked at each face in turn, not for guilt, not yet, but for how each person chose to be seen. Miles, jaw set like a man picking a fight with grief before grief picked a fight with him. Lydia, eyes too bright, already writing an essay in the margins of the moment. Graham, counting possibilities as if they were coins. Evelyn Cross, hands steady, breath measured, accepting chaos into her practice like a difficult patient. Clara, immaculate even in shock, as if she had rehearsed that too. "Anders," Rowan said, "lock the doors, north and south. Check the basement hatch. Bring me the generator log. Then stay in the foyer. If anyone tries to leave, you shout." "Yes, sir," Anders said, already moving the way a man moves when weather is a task. Rowan looked up at the chandelier. One antler had a curiously unburned candle, new wax, wick long. Someone had meant it to be unlit. He stepped to the doorway and glanced down the hall at the regulator clock. It read 8:36, but the hands had a smear along their arc, as if someone's thumb had tapped them, impatient, and left oil in a crescent. "Detective," Lydia said softly, "are we suspects?" "We are a house," Rowan said, "and the storm is a lock." He drew the linen gently up over Victor's chest, not to hide the fact of the knife, but to keep drafts from spreading blood farther into the weave. He looked again at the green smear under Victor's nail, and at the bone fox on the hilt. He thought about the security camera with the sleeping eye, and the one knife missing long before the lights failed, and the generator that caught on the sixth count, not the third. "Let's begin," he said, "with where everyone rose when the lights went out, and why." Outside, the storm answered with the steady patience of something that believes it has all night. Part 2. The Lockdown and First Statements. The storm pressed harder against the windows, snow smearing the glass like an impatient painter with too much white. Inside, the lodge held its breath. The knife in Victor Harland's chest caught the candlelight with cruel precision, bone hilt gleaming pale as a tooth. Detective Rowan Hale remained standing, his shadow stretched long across the table. "We lock down now," he said evenly. "No one leaves this house until I am satisfied. Anders, doors, shutters, basement hatch, and bring me the generator log." The groundskeeper nodded, already pulling a ring of brass keys from his coat. His boots left damp crescents on the parquet as he vanished toward the foyer. Rowan turned back to the table. "The first step is statements. Each of you will tell me where you were, what you did, and what you heard in the blackout. Spare me theatrics. Lies will come out like cracks in ice." The guests shifted uneasily, like a jury realizing the verdict might trap them too. Clara Harland's account. Victor's widow in waiting leaned back, folding her hands with the stillness of someone prepared for judgment. Her ring flashed as she turned it idly, then stilled. When the lights failed, Clara said, her voice controlled as glassware, I did not move from my chair. My habit, she tapped the table lightly 3 times with the ring, a rhythm Rowan recalled from before the lights failed, is to keep still in the dark. You'd have heard if I'd left my place. Rowan studied her hands. They were pale, perfectly still, but the faintest indentation from the martini glass remained at her fingertips. He remembered the single chime of glass after the lights returned. Her ring tapping again, unobserved. You didn't call out? Rowan asked. Clara's smile was thin. What good would it have done? Her gaze slid across the table toward Miles. Some of us did enough moving for everyone. Miles Harland's account. Miles leaned forward, his chair screeching as if it resented him. His jaw was tight, voice brittle with accusation. Yeah, I stood. Reflex. I thought maybe the generator was shot and Anders could use another pair of hands. I took a step left, knocked my chair back, and sat down again when the light sputtered. He gestured vaguely toward the service corridor. I never reached the door, and I sure as hell didn't touch my father. Rowan glanced at his hands again. Fresh scuffs along the knuckles, skin split just enough to speak of recent impact. Miles noticed the detective's eyes and pulled his fists into his lap. You expect us to believe you sat back down in under a minute? Rowan asked. Miles bristled. That's what happened. Clara's dry voice cut across the table. My son has always had a flair for half-truths. Lydia Voss's account. The critic's tartan coat slouched off her shoulders as she crossed her arms. Lydia's eyes glinted sharp, cataloging everything. Candle smoke, wine stains, tremors of hands. I didn't move, she said, but someone brushed past me. Right shoulder. Quick, deliberate. Not Anders. He's too broad. Too short to be Clara. Someone with purpose. She tilted her head toward Graham Tate, her smile thin as a blade. And I smelled smoke, fresh, cigar smoke. Odd, given Mr. Tate's protests of abstinence. Her fingers toyed with the bracelet covering her faint wrist bruise. She seemed to enjoy the suggestion more than the certainty. Graham Tate's account. The lawyer's scowl deepened, his tie knotted like a noose. I don't smoke indoors, he said flatly. Haven't in years. If you smelled smoke, Miss Voss, perhaps it lingered on my jacket. Nothing more. Rowan let the silence hang. Graham's eyes flicked once toward the sideboard where an empty ashtray sat, polished but faintly scented. Not damning, but inconvenient. I set down my fork when the lights went, Graham continued. I sat still. I waited. When the power returned, Victor was already. His glance at the knife finished the sentence. Rowan noted the lawyer's steady hands, but his tone was rehearsed, as if he had already given this testimony to himself in his head. Dr. Evelyn Cross's account. The psychiatrist folded her hands calmly, her presence unnervingly serene. When darkness comes, detective, panic is natural, but panic blinds, so I placed my palms flat on the table and closed my eyes. Breathing, centering, when the lights returned, my hands had not moved. And what did you notice? Rowan asked. Her eyes moved to Victor's untouched glass of burgundy. That he hadn't drunk the wine. Victor Harland never left burgundy untouched. He sipped only his water tonight. That was unusual. Her voice lingered on unusual as if the word itself contained a diagnosis. Anders's account. The groundskeeper returned, cap dusted with snow, generator log under one arm. His boots squeaked softly on the floorboards as he spoke. Power cut at 8:34, he said, tapping the log. Generator choked twice, caught proper at 8:35. I was in the service corridor the whole time. No one left this room by the kitchen. I'd have seen. Could someone have slipped to the gallery? Rowan asked. Not without passing me, Anders said firmly, and I saw no one. Rowan's observations. Rowan circled the table slowly, like a hand sweeping a clock face. The knife, bone hilt, inlaid fox. It matched the missing slot in the foyer's antique display, which meant it had been stolen earlier, not grabbed in panic. too deliberate. The blade, too clean, wiped before use. No greasy prints, no sweat. Someone had been prepared. The blood, less spatter than expected. Victor had been struck with precision, not frenzy. Victor's nail, green smear still visible beneath. The same shade Rowan had spotted on the security panel screw in the gallery. The clock, 8:42 now. The faint, oily smear on its hand suggested someone had touched it earlier, perhaps to tamper with time. Contradictions emerging. Clara insisted she never moved, but Lydia swore someone passed her seat. Miles admitted standing, but his quick retreat sounded rehearsed. Graham denied smoking, but the scent was fresh, unmistakable. Evelyn pointed out the untouched wine, suggesting poison could be at play even before the knife. Anders swore no one left by the kitchen, but the foyer knife proved this wasn't spontaneous. Rowan said aloud, voice steady as the storm howled against the shutters. Someone in this room had the knife ready long before dinner. Someone timed the blackout. Someone meant Victor Harland to die tonight. Clara's martini glass chimed once more against the plate, delicate as a metronome. Miles flinched at the sound. Lydia smirked faintly, like a critic amused by poor stagecraft. Graham straightened his tie. Evelyn folded deeper into calm. The detective's gaze shifted toward the gallery, where the linen-shrouded masterpiece still waited. Victor's final performance had not yet revealed its stage piece. And now, it never would, except as evidence. Part 3. The Gallery and the Will. The storm outside had stopped gusting in petulant fits and settled into conviction. One long, low pressure of wind that pressed its mouth to every seam of the house and hummed. Harland Lodge took the sound the way old ships take the sea: flex, complain, endure. Rowan Hale led them from the dining room to the gallery in a thin procession that kept trying to break formation. Miles quickening, Lydia drifting sideways toward a painting, Graham lagging, Clara refusing to be the first or the last, Evelyn a metronome of even steps, Anders a quiet keel behind them all. The detective's silhouette moved ahead, a cutout against a cold rectangle of light. The gallery held the weather in its stone the way a cellar holds last winter. Heat had difficulty being certain here. Condensation filmed the panes. Each time the wind shouldered the glass, tiny trickles hesitated and slid down, silvering the view of the white world beyond. The air had the dry tang of old varnish and the lemon oil polish Anders used on the frames. Art was everywhere, as if Victor had built a chapel to his hunger. On the left, the carnival ablaze tortured the eye with flares of cadmium and alizarin. Someone had added a scrap of real newsprint into the paint. Lydia had written once about Victor's collage habits, how he liked facts trapped in fiction. Opposite hung the faceless portrait, a woman's throat luminous, pearls perfectly rendered, the skin above them a deliberate void. A plaque read, "Study in presence/absence," but Victor had scrawled, "Don't let her lie to you" on the back in charcoal. Rowan had seen it days ago when Victor gave him the tour that pretended not to be a confession. Between them crouched the bronze hand, palm up, fingers soft with use, the patina worn shiny where passers-by had touched it, unable to resist the superstition of luck. The center of the room was a stage, easel, linen shroud, spotlights aimed, the floor beneath free of rugs, as if Victor had planned for paint to fall. Rowan squatted at the base and touched 2 fingers to the smudges there. Not dust, but the gritty, oily residue of charcoal and vine black. He rubbed a pinch between finger and thumb and smelled it. Charcoal and the faint ghost of fixative. Recent. He circled. The shroud had a crease at its bottom hem. 2, actually. One shallow and new, one deeper, older. Someone had pulled this cloth before. Once recently. Once before that. Rowan stepped until the varnish's sheen grabbed a ghost of him and mingled it with the painted torchbearer. The paint was fresh, a tackiness remained along the ridges, a smell of linseed and impatience bit the back of his throat. He lifted the lower right corner half an inch. Victor's signature sat there, smaller than usual, compressed, not the swaggering flourish collectors like to brag about. Beneath it, the charcoal scrawl cut across the linen's tooth, pressed hard enough to fray the weave. Liars. Clara had recovered first. He enjoyed cruelty, she said, voice smooth but powdered with something raw. Even to the last, he needed to arrange the room so we would look ugly under his light. Evelyn stepped nearer, not to the canvas but to the space between canvas and viewers. Or to make you look, she said softly. Lydia moved to Rowan's left shoulder, close enough that he could smell the snow in her hair. He hid things in paint, she murmured. This, she indicated the torchlight across faces. This is not just symbolism. He was telling you you'd be the one to expose it. He wanted you here to see him say it. Wanted me here, Rowan said, or wanted me here to take the blame when truth made enemies? Lydia's mouth tilted. Both can be true. On a side table, heavy cream paper waited under the fox crest. Rowan lifted the envelope. The flap had been sliced cleanly with a blade, no ragged tear, no fingernail worry. Anders kept the letter opener by the guest book in the foyer, a little steel fox with a clever tail. The impression of such a tail was faint in the wax. Someone had pressed too soon. He slid the wheel out and let the paper's tooth ride his thumb. The ink was sharp. At the bottom, a neat countersignature that knew it was being judged, Graham Tate. Rowan read. The words fell in the gallery like nails driven into a lid. Clara. The lodge only. The rooms that knew her footsteps, the shutters that knew her ring's rhythm. Everything else, sold, gifted, taken away. Miles, a stipend, a leash. Enough to live, not enough to thrive or pay the sharks. Lydia, the collection, not its valuation, but its gravity. The keys to every room in Victor's cathedral. Evelyn, the journals, not cash, not objects, stories, data, confessions in the language of symptoms. Graham, nothing. A lawyer's nightmare, his name on a paper that erased him. Anders, a trust, enough to make the grounds his own, or to leave them forever. Clara's eyes did not widen, pupils tightened, a more honest tell. He made a mausoleum and set me as the weeping stone, she said. How Gothic of him. Miles's fist hit stone with the stupidity of pain. He hissed and shook his hand. He knew, he said through teeth. He knew what I owed. He wanted me to beg him one more time. His gaze slid to the painting of himself, hollow-eyed. He took joy in it. Graham ran a thumb under his collar as if his skin had suddenly grown. This won't stand. He changed terms after my review. It's unconscionable. You signed, Lydia said lightly, never taking her eyes off the painting. Perhaps you didn't read. How lawyerly. He flashed anger, then swallowed it because professional men do not snarl in rooms where they once set terms. He misrepresented. He played you, Clara said, not even looking at him. Please don't embarrass yourself further. Evelyn touched the edge of the will and did not take it. Medical journals. He kept more than he told his doctors. Of course he did. She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed with the heat of a problem to be solved. If he wrote honestly, he wrote about all of us. Anders stood with his cap twisting in his big hands, a rough worry that had polished the wool. I fix pipes, he said, like a man explaining to a court why he had been invited to sit with princes. I keep the drive clear. I don't know why he'd leave. He stopped. He said once the trees were the only things that didn't lie to him. Maybe he thought I was a tree. Congratulations, Clara said, and set the word to cut. Rowan let the room's noise fade down until his own thinking could be heard under it. He went to the camera in the northeast corner, the dark one, and pulled a little pen light from his pocket. A quick angle of the beam showed the lens was intact. The housing screws were clean. He opened the security panel, careful not to smear the vertitor. The camera list scrolled on the tiny display. Cam 1 SW online, Cam 2, NE, offline. Timestamps 3 hours old where Cam 2 had gone black. 3 hours, Rowan said, not quite to them. Plenty of time to choose a knife before dinner. He looked down at the baseboard. A grain of something lay in the seam where wood met stone. He dug it free with a fingernail. Charcoal, Not a stick, shard. Snapped recently. A tiny smear of green rotted like moss. He put it into an evidence envelope without looking at Anders' face, which had that pinched look of a man who will be suspected for merely having keys. Lydia watched the envelope vanish into Rowan's pocket. He sketched right up until tonight, she said. That word, she nodded at Liars. He didn't commit to that until the last minute. Look at the pressure. That's fury, not composition. Rowan stepped back to the easel and knelt to level his eyes with the stretchers. Tiny pinholes along the linen's edge told a story of a canvas restretched quickly. The lower right had been pulled tighter than the rest. He smelled, faintly, turpentine, fresh but not stinging. A wiped brush had been cleaned and the rag discarded, somewhere. He looked to the nearest trash can, empty. Anders had emptied it? No. Anders's rounds were morning and after events, never mid-dinner. Someone had cleaned the scene. He stood and scanned the floor. The shroud had made a soft skid on the stone and settled with its hem just touching a faint, narrow shoe print, pointing not at the painting, but at the side table. He crouched, men's size near Miles, but slimmer. Graham's? Rowan pictured the lawyer's soles, leather, half-heel, a little proud of repair. The print had no heel mark, only the forefoot's oval. Lydia wore boots with a herringbone cut. Clara's heels would have left a stiletto bite. Evelyn's shoes were flat, nearly silent. Anders's boots would have printed lug. He touched the mark and lifted a graze of powdered sugar, pear tart glaze, or dust thrown from dessert. A thin line of fine glass dust revealed itself when his penlight kissed the stone. He followed that sparkle to the easel. The glass protecting the painting, there was none. Victor had left it naked. But the side table's protective cover, the little bell jar that usually sat over a bronze, was cracked, it seemed held to itself by careful placement. Someone had lifted it, set it wrong, and set it back, and the hairline had shed powder when it shifted. Do not touch that jar, he said without turning. No one has, Anders said. Someone has, Rowan said, and moved on. He crossed to the security keypad and checked its time against his watch, off by 3 minutes, slow. The regulator clock in the hall, he remembered, had smears of oil on its hands and had chimed offbeat. A house with two truths about time was a house that allowed alibis to breed. Clocks are wrong, he said aloud. How convenient. Clara's ring ticked once on the side of her glass, a little treason of control. Surely you don't think one of us tampered with time. I think someone in this house rearranged more than furniture, Rowan said. He lifted the will again and read a second time, slower, to listen to the words with different ears. Clara, the lodge. He looked at her face when he said it again. A minute contraction at the phrase. Lodged as much as lodge. Miles, stipend. Sweat had formed along his hairline despite the cold. Lydia, collection. Her mouth did a flicker that might have been pride, might have been fear of responsibility. Evelyn, journals. Her right forefinger tapped twice against her left wrist, a habit he had already clocked when she was thinking faster than she spoke. Graham, nothing. The word landed in the gallery like a soft body. Anders, trust. The cap stopped twisting. Rowan faced the painting again. The torch in his likeness threw light onto the others, but also cast a shadow behind him that ran up the wall like a wound. He followed that paint shadow with a fingertip in the air and found it paralleled a hairline crack in the plaster. Victor had lit the rear wall into the painted lie. Or truth. He would have enjoyed the pun. Clara moved a fraction closer, drawn against her will. If he meant to expose us, why summon you? She asked Rowan, voice like the good silver no one was allowed to put in the dishwasher. Because he wanted someone to hold the match when the curtain burned, Lydia said. It was always performance. He needed an audience that bites back. He needed a witness who wouldn't flinch, Evelyn said, or who would flinch and go forward anyway. Graham had been pacing the length of a lawyer's patience and finally spent it. This is grotesque. You'll poison the jury pool before there is a jury to poison. Clara is right. He orchestrated this. He was capable of ending it himself to spite us with the mess. Rowan turned his head slightly. If Victor stabbed himself, he said, he did it in darkness with a blade taken earlier from a locked display, timed to a generator hiccup he did not control, and managed to wipe the steel before he died, while making not enough blood to match the performance. He also had the courtesy to leave green pigment under his nail that matched the tampered panel, and to leave his wine untouched while sipping water in a room where someone noticed that departure from ritual. Evelyn's gaze met his. "I noticed." "Yes," Rowan said, "you did." He looked at Victor's water glass on the sideboard in the dining room doorway, visible from here along the sightline through the arch. A finger trail of condensation still marked one side. He had seen earlier that Victor's burgundy was untouched. A man who worshipped burgundy did not abandon it without reason. Knife and poison were not mutually exclusive. Steel could be theater, chemistry could be murder. Rowan stepped to the doorway and peered down the hall toward the regulator clock. The pendulum still swung, but its beat was not clean. The bob scraped faintly near the low point, a whisper of metal kissing metal. He opened the glass and checked the hands. A faint crescent of oil glistened on the 8 to 9 arc. Someone with a thumb and a plan had touched time. He closed the door carefully and returned to the gallery. "Anders," he said without looking back. "The camera in the northeast has been dark 3 hours. Who shut it off?" "Sir," Anders said, stiff as an oath, "I didn't touch the cameras today. Mr. Harland sometimes did, when he didn't want, when he wanted to try compositions without being watched." "By whom?" Lydia asked, too softly to be just curiosity. "By anyone," Anders said. Rowan filed that alongside the missing foreign knife and the empty slot he clocked on arrival. He stepped past Graham, catching the faint live smell of cigar despite the man's denial, and knelt by the easel once more. A fleck of bone white lay there. Up close it was not bone, it was gesso, knocked from a canvas edge when a quick hand had bumped the stretcher. He put it with the charcoal shard. Clara's patience finally lost a button. "Detective, if you intend to lecture us at length on paint crumbs while my husband lies cooling under linen, perhaps you could do us the courtesy of being efficient." Rowan rose and took in each face in turn, the way a teacher takes attendance on the first day, knowing he'll remember who sits where forever. He spoke without raising his voice, and for that reason it carried. "Victor Harland set a stage," he said, "but someone else directed the ending. The knife was readied long before the toast. The dark was used, not endured. The clock was touched. The camera was blinded. The wheel was opened, and this painting," he gestured to their grotesque reflections, "was finished late and labeled in fury with a word that applies equally to the victim and to all of you." He lifted the wheel once more so its paper voice could join the storms.